Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome now to the question and answer session. First of all, I'd like to thank all our speakers for their input this afternoon. And we're now joined live by Philip, Michael, Melissa. Unfortunately, Andy can't be with us. And hopefully we can sort of continue the debate between us. Just to start this off, one of the things that has come across to me during all these presentations is the importance in transparency and communication if we are to use AI and maintain that public confidence, which is something obviously, Michael, you've just been talking about. And it was interesting to hear what you were saying about law enforcement websites having very little knowledge on there or information around the use of technology. And I think probably historically, certainly from what I've seen, is that there is still a tendency in law enforcement to be reactive rather than proactive. So it'd be really good to hear each of your thoughts on how you think we can be more proactive in working with our communities and ensuring that actually we take them with us more than anything else. Michael, can I perhaps start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here today. And hello, Melissa. I think what's been intriguing, with the research that we've been conducting is there's no modernization or willingness to some extent from the law enforcement to even recognize the necessity to be looking to explain some of the use of their new technologies, or even the intended destination of acquisition of various tools, or even just having a public debate with regard to the communities they serve in relation to some of the technologies they use. Some of that is as a consequence of some of the concerns that have been raised and wrapped around the use of facial recognition as an example. But also as well is a lack of understanding in certain quarters within law enforcement, to actually knowing what capabilities they actually have, how they function, the value that they hold to the public. Even if we look at back office systems which have been acquired with public funds to assist them in the efficiency and the management of the resources, when you actually are in positions where you're explaining these sorts of investments and use of these systems to the public, they're actually pleased to hear that these capabilities are at use and they're deriving real dividends, which is making or taking rather more mundane tasks away, or better efficiencies in tasks undertaken by the police, which can then allow more policing time to be spent on frontline duties, as an example. We've seen a couple of pockets across the world with regard to incidents where there is some good visibility and engagement. So, for example, New York Police, New Zealand Police, a little bit with Singapore Police. But generally, there's quite a lack of appetite at the moment with regard to this necessity. But it's going to come more to the fore, as we're seeing, as the technology gets more widely used, with regard to the police wanting or needing to explain to them, because within that are some of the chat bots and the digital tools that are being used for victim engagement, self-reporting, etc. So there's quite a large education campaign that's got to go around the use of some of these digital systems, and also as well, not just explaining, how to engage with them, but explain their purpose and use as well. So I think that's of high importance. Did you have any comments that you wanted to share? Should we?
Yeah, thank you. What's interesting is that traditionally law enforcement officials have been quite secretive about implementing new practices and procedures. And they did so largely because if they were more transparent about their investigative processes and tools, they were probably reasonably worried that criminals would game the system by that knowledge. But I think we are kind of turning the corner here in terms of using AI, where the police don't really have the resources and abilities to develop it on their own or operate it on their own. As well as the AI now has significantly different and greater challenges in terms of the potential for mass surveillance and other intrusions upon the legitimate interests of citizens. But I also think so. I believe that there should be private-public partnerships in um, kind of an oversight both of the choosing the tools, implementing the tools, using them. I think a lot of police agencies probably are more skeptical about those partnerships than they might otherwise be, just in terms of there are a number of people, academics as well as people in the industry who are not necessarily um, always negative to or critical of the use of AI in policing. For example, I'm in favor of it to the extent that AI can offer a lot of benefits, as we have all discussed. But at the same time, we are willing to work with police about how to do it in a much more effective, transparent pattern in terms of allowing there to be the benefits enjoyed, while at the same time improving upon how it's done and protecting the public. So that balance in terms of the public-private partnerships, I think I would hope that law enforcement agencies are more willing to accept that, because some of us are willing to cooperate with them and to help them balance the benefits versus the potential downsides.
Thanks. I got my microphone sorted now, Michael, so hopefully we'll be okay. Philip, could you sort of tell us a bit about this communication side really in America and how you're tackling it over there?
So I do echo a lot about what Melissa had to say, as far as there's perhaps, or I suspect, some sort of security concern that if this information is conveyed, that it could create a bigger problem. And maybe that is in fact a deceived perception, but a perception nonetheless. The other issue that I think that we really see are the vendor limitations, where the vendors are safeguarding their proprietary information. And because of that, they give a very generalized way that their system is performing, and their intellectual property is guarded by copyright or patent or whatnot. And this creates a lack of knowledge for the administrator that doesn't even fully understand what they are deploying within their agency. And then that lack of understanding is conveyed to the public because there's no information out there. And one of the things that I think needs to continually be addressed is, I understand that there has to be a level of intellectual property, and businesses are trying to beat each other to the punch, if you will, in the AI implementation process, but it can't come at the risk or the cost that the public doesn't know what the program actually is. And so I think those concerns are probably some of the biggest issues as to why that information isn't put out there. But if you survey in the US, there's about 18,000 different law enforcement agencies, and only a fraction of them actually publicly post their police department policies and procedures. And there are some policies and procedures that would be of risk to have publicly disclosed. But when we get into this world of trying to be transparent with regard to an artificial intelligence that the agency is using, there has to be a level of disclosure that is out there. And that framework isn't really designed yet. And some of the things that we're working on, trying to get that framework out there so agencies will not only provide the information on the software that they're using and require in their vendor contracts to have language that is disclosable to the public. Also, we want to be able to have some first steps or some incremental processes in how they deploy that. That includes the public information, and then the interaction with the public, which is oftentimes, I call it the STPs, the same 10 or 20 people that the agency may go to that are maybe public voices, but not perhaps the voice of the entire community. And I think that needs to all be gathered together and much more clearly conveyed to one another, so we can talk about, hey, this is what the program is, and actually get feedback onto how that program is going to be deployed. I think of a situation where we put some cameras in place, and my citizens advisory board actually came to me and said, we don't want data kept longer than 2 weeks. And so if you have that level of interaction with your community, then I think you can deploy that and they understand that. But that is a very small percentage of agencies, specifically in the US, that are even embarking on that adventure. Pretty much they are trying it. If something is publicly concerning, I think of like facial recognition. You think of Microsoft that has the moratorium on facial recognition for US law enforcement agencies. And so law enforcement agencies are just switching to a different vendor and using Clearview instead, which we know in the UK has been fined a lot of money. And so we're not doing a good job at actually getting the public involved and actually providing really clear direction on what we're trying to accomplish.
And I think as well, it's getting the message across to the public in a really simplified manner as well. It's all very well having documentation on a website, but even a short 2-minute piece on the website from a senior officer saying, this is how we're using facial recognition in the Met. This is how we're using it in Avon and Somerset, to get these messages over. And it just seems to be a sort of reluctance sometimes to do it. I've got a message or a question here for you, Melissa, from Scott Thompson from Police Service of Northern Ireland. Do you think that sex offender risk assessments could ever be undertaken by AI, bearing in mind sometimes the complexity and nuance of the information and how difficult it is to record and digitize?
Certainly. Generally, we think that AI is going to be the next step in terms of improving risk assessment tools across the board, but for sex offenders specifically. So the AI, for example, we're getting larger data sets of individuals, specifically sex offenders. AI can be used, for example, to mine that data to find both factors that correlate with reoffending, as well as interactions that humans that we may never have anticipated are relevant. We also see AI in terms of having the benefit of potentially, depending on your perspective, though, of drawing on additional databases. So traditionally for risk assessment tools, the databases had been police resources and such, for example, criminal history and rearrest, but there are now additional data sets that AI can mine, such as social media data sets that can, for example, put together connections between potential offenders as well as potential victims. There certainly is going to be AI effects in terms of, more specifically, of sex offenders who are dealing with child pornography, or in the UK, we tend to call it indecent images of children, that they're going to be able to detect more of the places on the internet where that content resides, and then also be more useful in terms of trying to identify the users who are both uploading them, trading them, and downloading them as well. So yes, I believe that there is a future for AI to improve upon the risk assessment specifically for sex offenders.
Philip, have you got any experience of that in the States at all?
If you're asking me, as far as I know, they're just starting that, although they certainly could be doing things that they have not publicly released. But it does seem to be a natural transition of the use of AI, particularly for sex offenders who, the public is always afraid of. There's a great fear of sex offenders. So I think that's a natural next step for law enforcement agencies.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions I would like to raise is that obviously there is the ability with AI to take frontline officers away from some of the mundane tasks and allow AI to do it. But do you think we run a risk of then, rather than actually putting those into more operational roles, those officers, it being used as an excuse not to have so many resources, human resources within policing? Michael, can I start with you on that one?
Yeah, I know there's a fear, and I know Melissa used, the imagery of which we've seen in some jurisdictions, the robotic police officer patrolling shopping malls or areas of tourism. I don't see them replacing the humans in frontline policing, because, as we know, officers have to respond in a multitude of manners to certain situations, from low risk to high risk. Also, when we look at the development of the technology and the tools that are being used at the moment, it's quite clearly, programmed in for that human autonomy. They're there to assist the officer in the field and to compute or try and make sense of the multitude of data streams that are available for them, and to try and improve that decision making and bring some clarity into the field to their actions, or speed up the analysis of that type of material. So I don't see them replacing officers in the way that people may fear. And I know that officers in the field have some concerns with that, but having run large major investigations in the past, do I want my officers potentially sitting there in front of a body of CCTV cameras trawling through material for weeks and weeks and weeks on end in relation to a counterterrorism operation or something else, to try and find that needle in the haystack and track and trace them, when a computer can transform the processing of that and speed it up so that we can get to justice or to evidential leads quicker? Of course we do. So it's not replacing the officers, it's making them work a lot more efficiently and effectively, so we can get through the churn, get to the detail of the relevant piece of information that we want, make sense of them, make informed decisions based on them for action on or otherwise. And hopefully it should speed up justice for a lot of the communities. And more importantly, the consequence of that, you would hope, would be a reduction in crime and criminality in some settings, because people will see the foolhardiness of still trying to undertake those sorts of crimes. Hence, we take an example of the use of it in the UK at the moment, being used around shoplifting and petty crime to try and reduce the incidence of that. It's going to be an interesting experiment to see how successful or otherwise that is as a risk mitigator.
Okay, Philip, can I come to you on that one?
Sure. I would say absolutely not. What we see, the human interaction is the forefront of policing, and the engagement of the officer with the community is absolutely essential for multiple other aspects. And so I'm a big proponent on, human-centered policing first and AI on the back end. I really do believe that we're going to see a large percentage of increase on AI interactions on the back end, from analyzing data to text to helping provide directions, operation plans, etc. And I really echo what Michael's saying, because it is more valuable to have the computer go through 3 days of footage when we're trying to find if a suspect walked past an apartment building than it is to have officers sit there and do that. And it is more valuable to have an officer talk to somebody who just experienced a rock through their window than it is for them to talk to somebody on a phone tree and try to document that. People are at crisis on some of the smallest things, and they need to know that police care, because then they're more inclined to assist the police in other ways, which we all know we can absolutely not police without the public's help. And so I really do see that there are opportunities for the robots for safety issues, etc. But for the most part, we can't compromise the interaction with the public. And so I know there's been a lot of concern in the US that this is going to take away jobs, or as AI is implemented, we won't need as many police officers on the street. And I actually think it's not the case whatsoever. I think what we're going to see is a reduction in the stressors that are on the police officers because of the mundane tasks that they're required to do. And we require them to be so perfect in so many ways. And a lot of that is paperwork oriented. Officers spend a lion's share of their shift completing paperwork, and that should not be the case. The lion's share of their shift should be out interacting with the public and working with the public. And so I think as we work on showing all of these back-end systems, and as they get implemented, that will start to ease the minds of officers. But this is much like, back when they started using machines for the Industrial Revolution. People thought they wouldn't have any work if they used machines, and all we did was enhanced how work is done. And I think that's the same thing you're going to see in policing.
Thank you. Melissa, is there anything you would like to add on this one?
I wish I could be so confident it won't displace the number of personnel, just because I see in a lot of areas that funding of police is a political issue. But in any event, I agree. I would hope not, that the AI can take over, as has been indicated, some of the automated functions or things that can be better automated, or things that it can do more efficiently. And then hopefully simply that allows for the police humans, to focus on other things. So I hope it does not dent the number of police forces. It just allows them to be more efficient and assigns the humans more of the activities that do much more require a human touch.
Great. We have a question from Samantha Slade from Avon and Somerset, which isn't, I suppose, directly related to that confidence of the public, but it goes back to that age-old issue that forces and organisations, particularly here in the UK, and I'm sure it's no different in the US and around the world, there is still this drive for people going out, buying different systems, paying over the odds. And obviously in the UK, we've had the Police Digital Service trying to address some of these issues. She quite rightly says if we club together, we could get better tools, cheaper. And, how do we drive this forward without somebody in the centre, if you like, almost at government level, saying these are the tools that law enforcement will use? Michael?
Unfortunately, I can't see that being fixed in the short term because people are given independent authority to go shopping. Law enforcement doesn't have their own indigenous capability to self-grow these sophisticated tools, and where they do try to self-create or self-procure them, often they're limited in functionality, normally in partnership with local universities, as an example, is the development of some of the apps or tools in that regard. The big investment around some of these projects naturally has to come from industry. We've seen that with the development of the AI capabilities we've got the large language models that are coming online, etc. So there is the argument for scale. Procurement rules as well can systematically go against some of that intuitive approach where you're saying, well, of course you'd like to, but you still then have to go to market, bring some competitiveness into those market selections, rather than just one preferred vendor for capability. And also, because of the digital nature of some of the tools and capabilities that we're looking at, there is always that inherent risk of a single point of failure with regard to a single technology provider. We've seen that, and also public procurement and acquisition of IT on large-scale projects doesn't often go too well either. We've seen that within the Home Office with regard to large biometric systems and services and data analytical systems, like what happened up in West Midlands, etc. So, sometimes there is a beauty to be had in an eclectic mix, because then, so long as the monitoring and performance of those is taken with due regard, then over the fullness of time you can perfect them, so you get closer to perfect with these systems, rather than maybe being a bit narrow-minded, blinkered with regard to one size fits all. As Philip outlined, there can be some knee-jerk reactions as well to the use of some of the system providers. Microsoft was a classic example, and then the others will surf in and try and steal out with Clearview and others. So there's no easy fix with that. But what I do come back to answer Samantha's question a little bit better, is it's so important that you define the problem that you're trying to solve very precisely, because then you're getting the kit that's appropriate, and you're only buying the components of the kit that you want to solve that problem. There's a lot of technology that's bought where actually the functionality of it is only about 40%, 45% by law enforcement or others. They've bought kit which has got a much wider range of capability they didn't want, and they're just not using it, yet they're paying for it.
I mean, Philip, if we've got those issues in the UK, I'm sure with 18,000 law enforcement organisations in the US, it's almost an impossible task.
It is. And to reiterate, we do need some level of competition in order to have a level of innovation. And so that is important. At the same time, when we're looking at training these chat bots, a level of federation between multiple agencies coming together to help train that data to get that black box to work the way we want it to, I think is important. That's part of why I'm part of the Future Policing Institute. Is we're just trying to provide more of a framework, and I think more of a framework is of value, because when there's a framework, people are free to kind of still do what they need to do within the market and make their choices, but they're going to be looking at the repercussions as they make those choices. And I think that's probably the best we can do. But there's going to be people that are going to build it their way. There are going to be other people that are going to just, copy and paste. And I think of all of the open source information that's out there that they can start using. And I see a lot of, privacy concerns and crisis, but nonetheless, it is going to be what it is. And so, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it'll still be somewhat of a mess. But I think, if it's an organized chaos, I think that's the best we can do.
Thanks. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Michael, Philip, Melissa, and of course Andy, who's not with us, for taking part. For those of you that have been listening to all these series of webinars, or in fact joined for the first time today, just to let you know that as of tomorrow, all 4 webinars in the series will be available for you to view on demand. So thank you all for your interaction, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.